Hello, and welcome to the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Well, we're coming to you from Austin, Texas this week. We're here for South by Southwest at Dolby House. We have a great activation here all week long at South by Southwest, where we're showcasing some Dolby innovations and technology, not only in cinema and television, but also in music, gaming, automotive, and our web development platform, Dolby.io. Up here on our second floor creator space, we're hosting a lot of great conversations with people who are doing really interesting work. Today, I'm in conversation about the future of film festivals with Eugene Hernandez and Jacqueline Lianga. Let's jump right into it. So, by way of introducing our panelists today, I'm going to start by saying, like, how I met you, and then let you update us on what's going on currently. Jacqueline, I've known for a long time. I met her when she ran AFI Fest in Los Angeles and was doing a lot of really interesting work on new technology and the intersection of technology and film and storytelling. And so we got to collaborate on some fun projects between Dolby and the AFI Fest in Los Angeles. So, Jacqueline, what are you up to now?
So, yes, that was really, really great. So the space is there. So since then, I went to Film Independent, was the artistic director there for a while, and I'm currently working directly with the Berlinale, the Berlin International Film Festival. So hoping to bring a little bit of, which just took place in February, a bit of the kind of the global point of view on the future of festivals and audiences to the conversation. And in between that, I've been doing some work as well in the tech space with IMDb and Amazon. So thank you. I'm excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Eugene Hernandez, I met you, when I met you, you were the deputy director of programming for the New York Film Festival. And we got to work together on the Artist Academy, which is a program that I really love and I understand is going to be making a comeback this year at New York Film Festival. And again, you know, we groove on programs that are focusing on artist development, filmmaker development, access to technology. So working with you guys on Artist Academy was just a great fit for us. And you recently got a new job. You want to tell us about it?
And apologies for my voice. I've had really bad allergies here in Austin. So for those who are listening in on the podcast, eventually my voice is going to sound a little different. So I've got my warm water with some lemon. But yeah, when I met Glenn, I was at Lincoln Center. I was there for 12 years. I started IndieWire, and that was the first chapter of my career, 15 years. And then 12 years at Lincoln Center, ultimately running the New York Film Festival for 3 years. And then just joining Sundance as the new director of the festival and public programming. Just started there in November, just in time to kind of observe and kind of start to dig in on this festival that just happened, and we're already laying the foundation for the next one. And part of that work and research is traveling to other festivals. So I just spent time with Jacqueline in Berlin, and now here in Austin, and really getting a sense of, I think the work that Jack is doing in Berlin and the work that Janet and Claudette are doing here kind of gives us a good window into the future of festivals. I'm sure we'll dig into that.
Yeah, and I should note that we did ask Claudette if she had time to come and join us for this conversation, but you know she's too busy running around introducing
understandably
movies and dropping f-bombs and having a great time. Yeah, she's got her plate's pretty full. I wanted to start just by asking both of you, because you've been in the film festival ecosystem and this world for a long time, and I have a vested interest in this because I'm here because I love film festivals. I love South by. You know, there's so much, this is a time of such great disruption and upheaval in the cinema business, in the TV business, and of course that reaches into film festivals as well. And I am curious to kind of know from you guys, I see so much magical thinking in the film business and people just wanting it to be 2019 again. And COVID was obviously massively disruptive. I know it had a lot of financial implications for film festivals. I see a lot of film festivals just wanting to get back to 2019. And I'm wondering, What opportunities does COVID and this disruption present to really break the model, rethink it, and what should we be trying to do as we come out of this into the next generation? Because we're also, and the context of this is that most of these festivals are undergoing generational leadership change as well. So where should we be heading? That's just a softball, easy question to start.
You know, it's Sunday at like 12 right now, right? It's early.
Sure, I will start. I mean, I think one of the big challenges, certainly coming out of the pandemic, is that you have people in various individuals and organizations and nonprofits, states in terms of their budgets and finances. And so I think for film festivals, they're very expensive. And they're expensive for the organizations to mount, number one. They're expensive for people to attend. You know, I consider myself very privileged that I can go to festivals when I'm working and travel, but there are times when filmmakers, their films are accepted, they can't afford to spend that money to get on a plane or to pay for a 5 nights hotel. Or, you know, so I think these are really real and fundamental issues that enable a festival to be successful and have that influence and have people there on the ground. And then in terms of the corporate side, that means sponsors are also rethinking, you know, their budgets. What are they doing with their foundation money? And then also kind of in terms of cultural shifts, how they want to spend their foundation money. Do they want to spend it on impact and causes as opposed to just on putting their logo on a step and repeat, right? Or on a cup that people will hold. But these are all the kinds of, we've gotten used to at festivals for certain kinds of activations on the ground that aren't necessarily engaging. And so I think there's a rethinking of engagement that's necessary for all of those groups that attend a film festival. And a rethinking of, certainly, of financial models. You know, I think that's one of the big key things. And tied into that is the experience, which I don't know if we want to talk about it now, but I definitely think that, you know, that the experience being unique, festivals being special, and I think even for smaller regional festivals, figuring out their niche is really, really important. I think for the big festivals, even though Sundance is a really big and impactful, influential festival, it has a niche. It has a very strong point of view. You look to Sundance, it's the start of the year for a certain kind of premium independent film. And talent discovery. That's really, really key. That's quite niche. And some festivals try to be everything to everyone. And you just can't. And you can't be every experience for everyone. South by Southwest is another great example. We were talking about last night, some of the great screenings, you know, films you want to see in the Paramount, like Bottoms.
We were all at Bottoms last night, which
Yeah.
was pretty, that's a pretty unhinged movie if you haven't had a chance to see it yet.
But what a great experience. It was so fantastic to be back in the Paramount, to see with an audience and have that opportunity, which is then essential, happens at Sundance too, for the audience and the industry together to enjoy a film and to start to build that buzz and excitement for a film as it kind of heads out on its journey. So I think there's definitely a very key and important role for festivals. And I mean, certainly we'll see that happened in terms of films with, you know, everything last year, Everywhere All at Once, you know, premiering here, and we see where it is today. Really exciting, but that does come from in part a festival launch. People who love the film, the filmmakers, the community coming together to support a film.
And to your point, that also just doesn't come out of a vacuum, because the Daniels came up through the Sundance Labs. That, you know, their previous film, Swiss Army Man, was a premiere at Sundance. It went through that whole development process. So, you know, these things just don't come out of nowhere. There's a whole ecosystem and infrastructure that has to support these artists to grow.
I mean, I think inherent in your question, Glenn, is part of the answer, which is we're not going back. It's just not happening. We might be able to take some aspects of what festivals were, and I think Jacqueline is talking about it with the experience we have here. How many people work in film festivals particularly? And how many of you are filmmakers or creating? Okay. For those of you who work in film festivals, you're going to have to figure this out as well, right? And I'm glad to see there are people here who do, because that's a hard thing for people to overcome, is this notion that we're not going back. We struggled with that question at the New York Film Festival the last few years. And I'm sure it's something that other festivals are grappling with. But when you look at, like Jacqueline was saying, when you look at the crowds this weekend at the Paramount, or you look at the crowds in Berlin just last month, the audiences are ready to come back. But even then, it's not 2019. They're coming back in different ways than they were just 3 or 4 years ago.
Say more about that. What do you mean? How are they coming back in a different way?
I think they're engaging with festivals differently. They're engaging in movie going in theaters differently. When I was at Lincoln Center, we run 12 festivals, but we also do first run film programming. And in the time that I was there, during the beginning of the pandemic through the more recent phase up until the end of last year, we're just seeing movie-going habits evolving. They're changing. We go to movies differently. We're not necessarily watching fewer movies, but we're engaging with them differently, or we want to engage with them differently. And so at an organization like the New York Film Festival, or at Film at Lincoln Center, or I see David from the Hamptons Festival, Zach from IFP back here, like we're just seeing how audiences engage differently with films and with series. And festivals and organizations, nonprofits, have to figure out how to evolve or adapt to that. And it's happening in real time. So it's not like anything that we're making decisions about now is necessarily the long-term model, but it's like, what are the steps we can take to evolve with our audience? And when we get it right, when South by gets it right, and you can pack whatever the capacity of the Paramount is, more than 1,000 people into a screening like last night at 9:30 for Bottoms, which was an electric screening. It was like watching Everything Everywhere here a year ago. There's something magic about that. We were talking about it after we saw the movie together, and we're talking about wondering how that movie is going to be released by the studios involved and the companies involved. Will it have a theatrical release? Because there was something so special about watching that movie with a big crowd. And really like having that experience together. Now the movie's going to go further and wider when it's available on Prime, on Amazon. But will the folks releasing at MGM and Orion make it available theatrically? And if so, will audiences have a chance to gather around that movie, especially the younger audience that I think might really click with that movie? So I think in that is also something we're seeing with what festivals are trying to figure out. It's not just going to be the same model of how the audience engages with the films at festivals.
Yeah. I was just going to say there's definitely there's a specificity I'm finding to audiences and what they want to see and knowing more about what they want to see, and that may be a factor of so much more information, access to information on social media, some of the traditional models of communication, like you would arrive at a festival and get the program guide, or some have and then you would look through. People are doing more advanced, I find, research. So, for example, in Berlin, one of the films, American films there was it's playing here as well, Roger Ross Williams and Donna Summer's daughter, Brooklyn Sudano's film. And there were people who came, afterwards, I was talking to some of the audience, they're like, oh, I came here from Hamburg to Berlin, like just for this movie. And like not to see anything else for this movie. And I certainly felt some of that last night, and I feel that at a lot of these screenings, people, they know what they want to see, who they want to see, and they want to feel, not to overuse the word, but really like reflect. They're looking for films that they feel like reflect their experiences and their life. They're really tired of just like, okay, is this just going to be a movie that either isn't going to be discovery and exciting or has no connection to me and my experiences? So that's definitely one thing. And then also how they consume, how we all consume content and films. I hate saying the word content sometimes, but films and the work of artists is very different. Some people they only want to watch it digitally, or they want to be able to watch something in Berlin or at Sundance from their house, which it was great that this year there was that. You're still working through that, sort of managing both the in-person screenings and digital access, the timing of that, when you have access, what kind of windows windows in which you have access to a screening. And this is where, for the staff, as you mentioned, of film festivals and for filmmakers, becomes another, I think, one of the big questions that has to be solved in terms of how film festivals evolve. What is the window you're going to enable someone to screen a movie digitally? And how does that impact sales and distribution? And do sales agents and distributors kind of get on board in conversations with the filmmaker in a festival to enable that to happen? And then who makes that happen staff-wise? But back to budgets, you know?
So many segments of, to your point, so many segments of our audience want it to be 2019, and that's part of what we're struggling with. And I also wonder on the other side of that, if to what extent the festival experience becomes, or already is, but becomes the dominant communal experience around a film. Not that we wouldn't get people together at our homes with our giant screen TV, our Dolby Atmos sound at home, and have a great communal experience with a smaller group, which I think many of us are doing, and the early stages of the pandemic sort of forced us to kind of rethink what community is around movies. But I wonder to what extent festivals become that communal experience around film, even though some of the films that play here, some of the films that played at Sundance, Berlin, will have a theatrical experience, but perhaps not at the scope and scale that perhaps they might have just a few years ago. So I think it's a greater opportunity for festivals to become that communal experience.
Yeah, I have a whole list of questions where we're already going left, but that's okay. I want to ask you that about the hybrid model, because some film festivals. Let's just talk about South by for a second. South by was 100% virtual for a year, and then made the decision that's not the way we want to serve this up, and has gone back to being completely IRL. Sundance is pursuing a hybrid model. And I will say selfishly, congratulations. Sundance is the first film festival in the world to screen available titles in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos on their platform. You brought up a lot of interesting questions about rights holders and do they want them to be available for streaming because of how that could impact a potential sale. But how does that change the experience of what Sundance is if I'm doing it at home and not going to Utah for it?
I mean, on the one hand, it changes it fundamentally because for those who were able to experience the festival at home this year, outside, how many people were not at the Sundance Film Festival in person but were able to experience it outside of Park City in a different part of the country? I think it's meaningful, and we're deciding this year by year because everything's evolving. So what the version of the festival this year, Sundance Festival 2023, was a little bit different from 2022, which is a little bit different from 2021. So the version that we're working on now, which we're already doing a lot of work on for 2024, will likely look different from 2023. It's constant evolution. The thing that I keep thinking about and we're talking about a lot internally is just that our programmers at Sundance watch 15,000 films to this year come up with 111 features and 64 short films that screened at this year's festival. So they're doing, the programmers, the screeners, the folks who are involved with watching films for months over the course of the year are doing so much work to go out and find what's new and what is exciting about film in this country and around the world. And so what are the best ways for us as a festival to showcase that curation? I mean, this is where festivals really start. I mean, Jacqueline Nyanga is one of the most important and esteemed curators of film. She's been watching films on the front lines for years, going out and finding amazing work. Any festival that Jacqueline's involved with needs to be able to figure out how to express that curatorial vision and perspective that she brings. That it starts there. So all of that viewing, and I'm sure with Berlin, like the thousands of films that you all are watching, you want to figure out how to give those films the best shot at connecting with an audience. And in a moment when the marketplace is struggling with how to get those films out to an audience, festivals themselves have to figure out how to connect with audiences as well. And so it's a fundamental question, because on the one hand, some companies and filmmakers and sales agents would much prefer to be in the 2019 mindset, because that's much more controllable, and once you lose control of a film and its windows, it makes it harder to sell a film. On the other hand, I was speaking with a manager, talent manager here at the festival, who has a film that is not going to, mostly it's a first-time director, it's not going to sell for, it's a first-time director, doesn't have well-known actors, really good film, but doesn't have well-known actors on screen. So it's going to be hard for that film to find a significant acquisitions deal out of this festival. So this manager was telling me that they wish there was a virtual component to the festival here, because it would give more people a chance to see that movie. I think that in the next couple of years that will shake out a little bit. We're in the kind of most thorny aspects of it right now, because we're trying to figure out what's not going to hurt a particular film, what's not going to hurt their ability to find an audience.
And Jacqueline, to your point, I mean, talking about the amazing privilege that we all have to come here and be here for several days and watch these films. Obviously, that's the great promise of a hybrid model, is that you can have a whole new demographic of people and an audience experiencing these films who don't have the resources necessarily to make that trip. And so that's really exciting.
It is really exciting, the potential for the global reach. And that certainly is a huge audience. I was doing for a project looking at numbers and from some films and seeing, their independent films, American independent films nowadays really are incredibly successful internationally, whether it's a film, a comedy like, My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2, or a family drama like Minari, which made a significant amount, or their farewell of its profits globally, internationally. So I think that those opportunities, both in terms of digital and also in terms of festivals, are something that filmmakers have to be mindful of. And I think as a result of this as well, these changes, and sometimes there's if a filmmaker, like in terms of speaking to filmmakers, if your film is going to be at a festival that does have an international, or that does have global streaming or even domestic streaming available, digital access to films, it's a conversation you have to have. I think to some extent it changes the kinds of conversations that film teams have to have amongst each other, the producers, and also with the festival, getting ahead of it, because I think what happened is it all happened so in the pandemic quickly, and then there was some adjusting, and now I think to Eugene's point, I think we also have to accept that we are in a period of change, and things are going to change. They're going to change every year. And one of the things I found sometimes, or lately, as we've gone back to festivals, is people are saying, this isn't like it was, or we can't do that anymore, I didn't know. And things have changed, and they are going to continue to change. And then that's where I think for festivals, the key thing is actually communication, and the operations mind is thinking, but communication to all of the different constituencies of the changes, so that everyone can have the best possible expectations of what their experience is going to be on the ground, what they will have access to, what they won't have access to, and what that unique experience is going to be for them at the films that they've decided to spend that money on to attend. And I think that is one of, in terms of why things have changed, people, customers, audiences, we don't want to spend. We've already invested so much in our home theater experiences, which is an incredible thing. I certainly did, during the pandemic, and have in the past. But now you have to go to a theater to spend on your parking for people with children, on the babysitter, and the same thing happens for an in-person festival, for that travel, for all of those bits and pieces. How can, once they get to that experience, how can it be elevated?
I think one more thing to add.
Please.
We're digging in.
Go.
I think the thing we have to be sure of with any hybrid or virtual model as well is we don't want a film's first stop at a film festival, its first festival, to be its last stop in the ecosystem. And that's something that's really important. So that's why we
does
have...
that happen more if it's virtual?
Well, I think we have to make sure we limit the number of views a film would have. You don't want to hurt a film's chances to get out to audiences on digital ultimately. But also the other piece that we need to think about is also our art house colleagues. There's this great coalition of theater owners, independent theater owners, the Art House Convergence, that's reforming and has recently elected a new board, and the organization is supported by Sundance Institute. And each of those art houses, those mission-driven art house theaters around the country, is doing amazing work in their communities to cultivate and nurture and support and create film festivals, film programming in local communities, and we wouldn't want anything that a film festival does. Again, at a film's first stop, we wouldn't want to hurt or jeopardize that film's opportunity to have the ability to travel to other art houses, to other parts of the country. So it's challenging because I think on the one hand, we'd rather go back to the way things were. We can't do that. On the other hand, there's still a lot of friction between one size doesn't fit all. So for certain films at South by, it wouldn't make sense at all to be on a virtual platform. For others, like the example I gave, for a smaller film that doesn't have the big names attached, they're looking. It might be the way to help just get a little more attention so that the film doesn't go unnoticed or can be a little more noticed at a festival like this.
Yeah, I think that film, it's like that experience by film, in a way, tailoring more unique, and really looking at who is the audience. We're actually there was a really interesting conversation when we were in Berlin that the European Film Market had with Torino Lab about they're calling it kind of audience design, and they have which is really like audience development, and they were doing these think tanks, and they have public funding, which is kind of amazing.
We did a whole Saturday morning think tank about audience.
Yeah, and they have which we don't have, but to put towards it. But really thinking about how you design an audience, develop an audience for a specific film, and thinking about strategies and models and what are different kinds of techniques. And so they had brought together us and a number of different filmmakers, sales agents from across Europe to talk about this. Case studies, what's been successful, and I feel like we could use something similar actually in the US, considering we don't have the same kind of funding models because they essentially need to put forth new budget proposals. But so just to think about that, to get back on the point, that specificity of what does an individual film need? It's not a one-size-fits-all, even at a festival, solution. What is the theater size? These are things we think about at a festival already it needs. Is it going to really thrive in a 200-seat theater and find the best audience, or does it need a larger theater, a different kind of space, what kind of venue, so many different kinds of venues, but I think the digital becomes another component. Does it need a digital screening or not? What will this film, how can the festival best serve this film's journey?
So you brought up sales agents, and Eugene, you were talking about the filmmaker that you were talking with, the producer who has a film here that's seeking acquisition. I feel like this is sort of like, this is the reality of the ecosystem, but it's the uncomfortable thing that we don't often like to talk about, which is the acquisitions market and what's happening over there. And I know this is very obviously, it's important for Sundance and its role in the acquisitions ecosystem. But what are the trends that you're seeing right now in acquisitions out of film festivals, and how much upheaval is that in right now?
I mean, I think the upheaval is connected to everything we're talking about. Things are moving more slowly. I talked to a number of distributors, sellers, sales agents in Berlin, for example, who are still making decisions and making offers and trying to come to close deals on films from Sundance. This was a month after Sundance and in Berlin. That's still happening now with films from Sundance and Berlin, and now you have a new crop of films from South by. So I think the work of our friends who are trying to get films out into theaters or onto platforms on the distribution side is certainly not easier, because all of us are trying to make sense of as audience members, we're trying to make sense of how we want to watch and connect with film in an individual or in a communal way, in a theater or at home. So likewise, the people that have built businesses around getting those films out are struggling with, or if not struggling, grappling with how to do that meaningfully in a way that sustains their business and also is responsive to what audiences want. And that's harder to determine because, as we've just been discussing, the audience desires, needs, wants for different kinds of films are different. And it depends on the scale of a film. Sometimes you want to spend the money, you want to invest the time, the money, and the resources into having a communal experience with a whole bunch of people in a movie theater. And sometimes you want to have that more micro experience with the home theater, the Dolby Atmos, the your drinks and food at home. And sometimes you want to watch a movie alone on a device. Yes, sometimes on a phone, sometimes on a larger screen, but these are problems and challenges that filmmaking and film distribution has never really had to deal with in the way that they are right now in the history of cinema. And then artists are responding to that and making work differently and enhancing the work differently depending on those experiences. Right? I mean, look at sound. Look at the conversations we've had at the New York Film Festival with Dolby around sound and how you can design the sound. I'm learning about this from Glenn and the conversations we've had over many years at the festival. Watching a film like Roma, as we did at the festival, and the work that was done around the sound experience of that movie at the Dolby Theater in New York is different from the experience of watching it in a different device. It's no less significant, but it's just a different experience. So there's a lot more pressure being put on the filmmaker too to attune, for lack of a better word, the experience of a film to these different platforms. So it gives audiences a lot of opportunity, but it also makes the acquisitions market more challenging. But I think also we have to be patient. There are still films from Sundance being acquired. There are still films from Berlin finding homes. There will be films from South by. It doesn't happen in the ways that we used to read about, where it happens overnight. It takes time.
I think people get distracted by all these headlines about $20 million deals that happen to a small handful of films at Sundance.
Always.
Right? Yeah. Let's take South by and Sundance off the table for a moment. Who do you think is actually getting it right? Who's experimenting? Who's doing interesting stuff out there in the film festival world that's really kind of pushing this conversation forward?
One of the things I think is interesting has been, and I thought was quite smart, was actually Tribeca's move into June, into that time slot, moving away out of that April, slot where they were, sort of in at the similar time as South by. Now they've sort of owned this sort of independent films in the summer. They also, on the XR side, pieces that play here, or they can play some of those. They can premiere some new pieces. There's kind of, in terms of the U.S., there hasn't been a really strong, since we lost the Los Angeles International Film Festival, it hasn't been a strong independent festival.
Summer film festival,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a great summer film festival. And there are a lot of, which is a great time for independent film, and especially for documentaries films to launch, and certainly, so that I think is great. And that's the thing for festivals too, that can be that challenge is, films aren't just finished all on a calendar. They're not all like, we finished in October.
To premiere
yeah, exactly.
Sundance.
In time to make it to Sundance, for example, or even to apply, or Berlin, or Cannes. And that's just the calendar isn't so set for a filmmaker. The team, the artists are just working with the schedule they have. And whether it's a budget issue or creative issue, and that is the other thing, was you were talking about earlier, being there for, I think it is really important for festivals to be there for, as much as they can, the life of a film. Once a film launches at a festival, it's not just, okay, bye, thanks for coming. How do we, and I think that's one of the questions that certainly, I know we sort of took Sundance off the table, not Sundance so much, but certainly Art House Convergence was starting to talk through but prior to the pandemic, how exactly do you maybe, kind of how can festivals work together actually more collaboratively? I think that's really key. And that is something I'm seeing a little bit of. There were a lot of conversations, whether it was between festivals like San Francisco and Seattle, connecting. Seattle actually Film Festival is doing actually quite a bit. I really love, they've pivoted really strongly to digital, but offerings, and also bringing context. They have been doing a lot of really actually great, Beth Barrett, who's over there, is fantastic. Doing a lot of really great kind of educational, I don't want to necessarily call it, but they are. Some of them are educational, bringing in like professors, bringing in academics, filmmakers to talk about cinema. And that's where I also think the audience in this, I think, comes to them knowing what they want to see, is far more sophisticated now in a way, actually because of the access to information. And so as a festival, you have to be aware of that, and you have to respect that, and so that if they are going to watch, which is what is also great about Dolby Atmos, if they do decide to watch their film at home and create their own festival experience, they want it to look good. They want it to look great. The filmmaker wants that. The audience wants that. So that becomes the other challenge of the festival. How do you create, if you do have digital options, how do you create the opportunity for your audience to have that best possible experience at the film in their home, the sort of that home festival experience? Yeah.
I mean, the ones I think about those are great examples, and I think I'll name off a few, and then I'll sort of try to detail why. The ones I'm looking to, like Black Star, I think is a leading, is a beacon. It's a festival that's a brand, an amazing magazine, amazing programming. What Mayuri is doing with Black Star, I think, as a starting point, but also as a way to engage with cinema is really exciting. I think Overlook is a really interesting model, very specific niche, and it's just really fun and exciting. I think True False in Missouri, doing really interesting work, just had their 20th anniversary, and a festival that started as a micro cinema in a storefront that moved into the old Coca-Cola bottling plant, 2 screens and a cafe and a bar, that has become a 20-year kind of stalwart documentary film festival. I think those are all interesting to me, and I think the thing that I think about a lot is we need, in order to have a sustainable and healthy ecosystem for film culture in this country right now, we need to support and celebrate film festivals of all shapes and sizes in all parts of the country. That said, I think coming from New York, where I just was, my friends at Lincoln Center produce and curate and host a dozen film festivals, as I mentioned, each year. And I think they're doing amazing work of tailoring each of those film festivals. People might know the New York Film Festival and New Directors, New Films, but their Rendezvous with French Cinema Festival that just ends this weekend, a festival of French film, the African Film Festival in the spring. There are a dozen film festivals at this one institution in New York that are tailored to specific audiences and are kind of supporting an entire ecosystem of movie-going and cinema culture in one particular city. And some of those film festivals travel and tour to other parts of the country as well, in partnership with other organizations. And I think, to Jacqueline's point, that those are some of the things we have to think about too: relationships, partnerships.
To that point, actually, American Cinematheque in Los Angeles has been doing a really good job as well of pivoting. They're formerly their main Hollywood venue, the Egyptian Theater, is now owned by Netflix.
Netflix, right?
And so they have refocused, but they knew they had a core audience there. During AFI Fest, that was our main venue when I was there for 8 years. One of our main venues, in addition to the TCL Chinese Theater. And so they have actually moved into this smaller theater, the Los Feliz 3 in Los Feliz, and are doing and the flexibility of those small theaters then enables them to take chances. They're like, oh, we can take a risk now and some chances. And so there's some really great programming now that caters to this East Hollywood audience that I love. And then the Arrow, which is on the west side, you're a new part of town, is this, but is very much, and I don't want to say but it kind of is now sort of an older Hollywood audience in a way, but an audience where they're able to get filmmakers, master filmmakers, or someone like P.T. Anderson come in and present films that he loves, do 35 millimeter prints of 70 millimeter prints of films. So classic and legacy programming there. Tributes. They've really done a great job and rebranded as well visually. And True False, that reminded me, I completely forgot about them. Great example, during the pandemic when they couldn't have the festival, they actually built this, they mailed out to pass holders this great, did you get one of these chests? They did this big box chest that transported you, and you opened it up. And back to that specificity of film, they created a little package for each of the films you're going to watch with your pass. So there would be like an art object and a story. Here's how you could set up your screen. It was really magical. So I think there is that to thinking about for those audiences that are going to watch films at home, both for the filmmaker and the festivals. How can you bring them into the story of the film in some way?
That's a great idea. I was expecting you guys to kind of talk about broad overall trends, but it seems like what you're really leading to is like it's about the specificity.
It's about
it's about hooking the audience and really giving them something to think about.
Yeah, and I think even in how many folks here live in Austin year round. You don't need me to tell you, but I'll shout them out in case. I think it deserves shouting out that the Austin Film Society is like a film festival year-round. And for folks who live here in Austin, you have amazing film series and programs and festivals and events and one-night-only kinds of programming. I mean, the work that Linklater and his inspired through the Austin Film Society more than 40 years ago is fundamental to the film culture in the city, as well as the Austin Film Festival, the Queer Festival. I mean, there's so many tangents we could go into, but I think it is very bespoke and niche. You know, we could do a conversation Draft House is
again,
exactly.
in terms of that specificity of like audience and kind of film and experience.
And we could do a whole conversation about the queer festival circuit and the work that so many queer festivals have done to evolve and adapt to the changing needs of the queer community at a time when media representation is very different from when festivals started and we started going to them at an earlier stage of our lives as we were coming out and coming into our own as well.
And that's a great example of a community that's evolving and has very different needs than the community that you and I grew up with.
Yeah.
We've got some great, I'm sure, very interesting questions coming from to come from a lot of film festival people in the audience and filmmakers. We'll start with Sunny. Do you have a microphone? Let's come right over here, and then I'll come to you.
Hi. So first of all, thank you all for being here. As a quick question, in order to better serve sort of filmmakers and get signals about, hey, what you're doing is working or not, one of the things I heard you mention was that, when you go digital, how many showings do you have? Like how many virtual tickets? Have you ever thought of allowing people to bid up the value? So start at, I don't know, $20, something, pick your number, and they say, hey, if
Surge pricing.
Not surge pricing in the sense of that, but in the idea of, okay, if this thing went to 50 or 60 from 20, that's a pretty strong signal. If it stays at 20, different signal. So what it can do is it can really say, hey, has anyone experimented with pricing?
That's interesting, and that could be an interesting signal to an acquisitions person, like, oh, this movie really got bid up.
TIFF did, Toronto.
Oh, TIFF did
Yeah,
that?
they did it. Was it last year? Yeah, people didn't like it.
The audience didn't like it, or the filmmakers didn't like it, or nobody liked it?
I'll say, I think it's really, it's one of those things, and I think it's this conversation is when you're dealing with kind of film, art, craft as a commodity. You have these sort of two sides to it, especially at a festival where you've got the industry, you've got the operations, the audience coming, the event happening, and then you have the artists, and you also have at a festival, you're presenting the film as an organization, and you're not making money off of the film directly. So you're not a distributor, obviously. So I think it can be a real delicate as you think about as you're setting pricing and free tickets, it ends up having to be a real kind of 360 conversation between the filmmaker, the sales agent, if they have one, the distributor, if they have one, the producers. So it's hard to make that work. It's a good idea for some films, but it's hard to make that a blanket policy for every single movie.
I mean, Jacqueline ran a festival that adopted a free model, and I think that, I mean, it's to your point actually. Like, the burden is on festivals to really think about how to create a sustainable model for the festival at a lot of different price points, serving a donor base that might be able to pay a higher price for either access or for an experience that they want to have and they might be able to have, and that experience being able to support and sustain the work of the organization itself. But even at the New York Film Festival, we have events and evenings and experiences that are at a higher price point. But this past year when I was there, we had more free events and more free screenings than we've ever had. Certainly not as many as I think, and I think what Jacqueline and her colleagues did at AFI Fest was also very inspiring, to try to figure out how to create a free model that could work within a paid model as well, to give audiences an opportunity to experience that festival. The last thing we want is a festival experience that we design that is entirely elitist and unattainable and available to a mass audience. And how are we ever going to have like younger folks or folks of color or folks that wouldn't necessarily feel invited to a film festival have an opportunity to check it out if we don't really think about those different models of pricing and also access?
Let's go to your question.
Fantastic conversation. I program a tiny festival in a tiny country called St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And, not too long ago, we didn't even have movie theaters. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on where a festival like ours fits into the ecosystem and your thoughts on our future, in a place where the concept of a film festival is completely foreign.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a huge opportunity, I think. And one of the things when we were talking about True False and some of the smaller festivals, another small festival like that is very influential and impacts the community is Telluride, for example. Yeah. And these are these festivals where building that strong connection within the community becomes really key, and that's where find those art lovers, those people in the community who love food, who love music, and bring them into the fold, whether it's kind of on your board as partners for screenings, and they're the ones that are going to really build that festival. They're your audience, which I'm sure you know. I think that's the starting point, and then the specificity of what your mission is as a festival, the kind of filmmakers you want to support, and the kind of experience that you're creating. It could just, I don't know much about the festival, I would love to, but who's it for in terms of your presentation? Is it going to be discovery? Is it going to be classics? Bologna, for example, great, amazing classic. Like there's a real, I think, a real value to finding that niche as a small festival.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think about, my question to you to answer your question is, tell me about your audience. I mean, how many years has the festival been going on?
So we started in 2019. We had a in-person festival and then COVID hit. And
It's a tough time to start a film festival.
Yeah. And then we went to so our festival is community-based, so we don't even use theaters. We just, put up a projector, and it's a free model as well, because we're really trying to build up the culture, because people just really don't have that culture of going to festivals and so on. So our festival is Caribbean films and films from the Caribbean diaspora. And with our hybrid model, we've seen that, we got a lot of our viewers are from the Caribbean and the diaspora, our local audience, we don't get the numbers that we've been wanting. So it's a bit of a challenge for us. Yeah.
Hi there. As you'll probably work out very quickly, I'm from Europe, where we have a very different model of film festivals. And I feel for you guys, because you're running under pure capitalism, so you don't get to do what we do in Europe, which is have a lot of state-sponsored film festivals. So I'm just wondering how many people here know how much it costs a filmmaker to be accredited for the Cannes Film Festival. Any ideas? It's free. Obviously, you have to prove you're a filmmaker. You have to send them a CV and so on. I arrived here and found it's $800. How can I, as a small filmmaker making tiny films, afford that? So I'm going around without a badge. I'm pretty good at ducking and diving and getting in places. But that's a huge hurdle to a filmmaker, you know, and I just think you've got to be more filmmaker friendly before you start wondering about how do we get an audience in. I think you've got to get the cross-pollination that comes from bringing filmmakers in.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we could do an hour just on this, but any just quick thoughts about what we could be doing for more filmmaker support?
I mean, I'm not going to speak to the specifics of South by and their approach. There's so many festivals, there's so many markets, and I think what you're in your question and your comments, what you're showing is that you have to be ingenious and creative, and you have to be dogged in your pursuit of trying to figure out what the right path is going to be for you. I think that you can have a great experience at South by with a badge. You can have a great experience without a badge. Same at Sundance and many other festivals. It depends on what level of experience you're trying to have and what you can afford. It's a different model, to your point, very different model in the U.S. versus Europe. But there's such a wide array of festivals here, so I wouldn't want to paint them all with one brush, even here in the States, because there's certainly so many festival opportunities here, especially in local communities, I think, that do a great job of supporting local filmmakers in that specific community. Festivals are really expensive in this country to produce and put on, this one in particular. It's really challenging. So I take your question very seriously, because I think it's something that as festival organizers we think about a lot, is how to figure out how to make space for filmmakers at all stages, not just the ones that can afford the badge, but ones that are still kind of at an early stage of their career.
Exactly. And I think, one of the things, as you talked about, we talked about it as well. It's like the public support that there is in Europe. And also then we're going to, as the practicality, things like venue size. It also, like a festival like Cannes and certainly Venice, they have huge venues that some of them have 5,000 seats. And so that enables them to carve out, for festival, sections you already do as a festival organizer. So that determines where and how many, you can make available for free. But certainly, I think, again, as Eugene said, it's something that I think festivals are mindful all the time, and I think that filmmakers and people who curate festivals and produce festivals and support festivals, everyone is in the business of loving film.
There's so much interesting that you put on the table right there. I mean, I'm thinking about our friends in San Francisco who are, maybe losing the Castro Theater.
Yeah.
We don't know. SF Film had a venue that just fell through. So it's like the access, the theater ecosystem is undergoing.
It's a point I'm really glad you made, sir, because I think that for those who are here and also those who are listening to the conversation, there's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's going to be a matter of filmmakers trying to find the right network of festivals, the right network of markets, because you're also talking about markets where you're taking a film to a market to try to sell it. So you have to really think creatively, like this gentleman, and try to figure out how to develop a path for yourself as a filmmaker that may not be the same path as another filmmaker. You may not want to apply to the same festivals. You may need to find a different path of festivals and markets to put together that is sustainable for you. And I think that's a really important point that you made.
One final quick question. You're up.
Thank you so much. My name is Angelina McCluskey, and I'm a filmmaker here from Philly. So I was so excited when you said Black Star, because I know Maori from that festival when it was Black Lily, and it was just for women. And so thank you for that. But I would really love to become a programmer. I think I'd be really great at it. What kind of experience or background do you look for when you're thinking of hiring or bringing on new programmers?
I'm going to put in a plug, and then Jacqueline's the best person to answer this question because she's an A-quality, top-level programmer, but also she has nurtured and supported and brought up new programmers. But I think that Film at Lincoln Center has a program they just announced, which is a programming fellowship to help nurture and support the next generation of curators. I've done a lot of panels over many years, like 30 years. The number of times I've heard that question is very rare, where someone has said, I actually want to be a programmer, I want to be in festivals. It's usually, I want to make a film, I want to write, how do I get my script into hand? So thank you for asking that question, because I'm sure other people have that question as well. So I would say look into that fellowship at Lincoln Center. I think they're still taking applications. There might be other similar programs that I'm not familiar with. Jacqueline, if you know of any of them. But I'm going to think about that. But I would say start with that program, and then I would say the only other plug I would say is maybe volunteer at festivals if you can. I know it's expensive to try to find the time to volunteer alongside like doing sustainable work to sustain yourself. But a path towards getting into that side of things could be volunteering or getting some work as a screener for a film festival. But I don't know. What do you think is the right?
Yeah, I think that is definitely key. I mean, I think it's been evolving quite a bit. I think that program is great. Outfest actually has a really great program right now for programmers, and more festivals are starting to put together, realizing that it's kind of like curation in the art world in a similar way, in terms of there's definitely a threshold of a certain number of films that ideally that you've watched, or that you're able to watch a variety of kinds of films, or you build an expertise in research or in a specific region. But that's not necessary. It depends on the festival that you want to work for. So I would say, if you spend some time before you volunteer for a festival, looking at some different festival programs. Most of them have their archive or history of programs available online. And this also speaks a bit to the question the gentleman before had, because not every film is right for every festival. I mean, that's just kind of fundamentally, it doesn't mean that your film is not good or isn't going to find an audience if it doesn't get into a festival. There are so many incredible films, sadly, that sometimes don't make it. We've had to say we can't program because there are so many other factors. You have a limited number of venues, you have a limited number of slots. It becomes related. You're also sometimes trying to tell a story or a theme, or you're building a story with a festival. So you have to take that into account as well. And so as a programmer, that's another thing, to find other individuals, like in any industry, who you feel you might have an affinity with, especially as you're looking for opportunities to grow and for mentorship. So take a look at festival programs, see if you know some of those films, try to. Again, you can catch films. I love going on to, whether it's kind of Roku or Prime, and doing searches. Is the film available to screen even on Vimeo or on YouTube, especially shorts? See where you can find some films that you really like, and volunteer. Volunteer to screen specifically. Say that you'd like to screen with the programming team, and programming teams are often quite lean, as all the festival teams are quite lean, and so if you become a valued programmer, there can be an opportunity, if you're able to go even for a couple of days, to meet the programming team, to be at the festival for a bit. And it really, I started as a volunteer as well. You start by volunteering, you watch hundreds of movies, you watch maybe 1,000 movies in a year. You have periods of time where you're just watching movies, and then you have conversations and start to develop that critical thinking. And that's also something around cinema you can do with other filmmakers. It definitely found, filmmakers make great programmers and other writers. If you have a friend or group of friends who love movies, start talking with them about movies more, because I find even just at this point in my life, that helps me be a better programmer. Having those conversations, which is one of the other key aspects of a festival. And use your time here at a festival to actually talk about the films in detail with people, like why you liked it, why you didn't like it, why did they like it? Because we don't all like the same films, and that's not a bad thing. There are a lot of different kinds of experiences, which is back to, again, that sort of the specificity and understanding what is it in this content, what is it in this film, in this story that's making it resonate for me or for my friend when I don't like it and they love it. So starting to really think about films, I think, is really, really key in that kind of a critical way outside of just watching the film and you enjoyed it. So starting to bring that mindset, I think, is really key, the volunteering. And then certainly, if there is, where you live, if there's a venue that a lot of venues are looking and open to programming coming in, like perhaps there's a museum space or a theater to whom you could offer your programming services and say, you know what, there's these 3 films I loved, I'd love to show them. Start your own program, and reach out and offer to program them. Reach out to the filmmakers. There's often contact information in program guides online. You can email them and say, I'd love to show your film. And to our point earlier, not all films are getting acquired, and they want an audience. When you're a filmmaker, you want your film to be seen. So I think there are some things you can do without a festival, and then some things as you're learning as well, and building relationships really with programmers that can help you succeed. I hope that was helpful.
That's great. I could do this all day long, but I know you both have commitments that you have to get off to. So I want to get you out of here. I really want to thank Eugene and Jacqueline for coming in and talking with us today about the Future Film Festival. It's always good to sit down and have
thank you,
conversations
Glenn.
with you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah,
thank
you for inviting me.
Special thanks once again to Eugene Hernandez and Jacqueline Lianga for joining us for that fun conversation about the future of film festivals. Until next time, thanks for joining us. This is the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thanks for listening.